Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Industry Season 3, Episode 7, Useful Idiot. My name is Grace, but of course, I'm not alone, not joined by my usual partners I was going to say in crime. I guess they do crime on the show sometimes. Josh and Emily don't do crime, but alas, instead, I'm here with Jess Sterling, and we're going to get matching tattoos on their backsides of our Scorpio signs. Yay! Jess, how you doing? Scorpio signs? Is that right? That's not right.
Leo. We're
No,
Leos. What are
I'm
you
a
talking about? Or
Virgo.
you're a Virgo. I'm a Leo. What are you talking about?
I guess I think when I meant
Astrological
yeah, I
signs?
meant astrological. That's
Okay.
what I meant. Instead of I was just
I'm like, I'm a Leo. What are you talking
I
about?
maybe this is an instance they say band-aid in this episode. I wonder whether it's like when band-aids are actually like
Band-Aid's the
not
brand.
it's the brand, and did I just brand all astrological signs as Scorpio
People
signs?
are not going to be pleased, and people
Oops.
are probably already not pleased to be hearing astrology talk
On
on
our
an
industry pod?
industry podcast.
Well, I think
um,
the funniest line of the episode is, do you think she's
she's a
a
Libra.
Libra? Because
Yeah.
it's very mean, but still pretty funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jess, it's the penultimate episode of Industry. This episode is coming out a little bit later because I believe the Penguin, those dastardly. Speaking of crime, dastardly penguins bumping the time slot of Industry for the last two episodes. I've talked before. I said this with Taryn. I don't think this is the worst thing. I think that if you haven't, I don't think a lot of people are like stumbling into Industry on episode 7 of season 3. So I think it's fine to make those folks wait and actually get a little bit of the lead in with the Penguin before, which I think will have a pretty big audience. If they do, they can go back and watch a bunch of Industry. So Penguin bumps Industry a little bit. We're on the penultimate episode, and I thought this one was very interesting. This one moved. So many things happened in this episode, Jess, to basically set us up for what I think will be a pretty interesting finale episode next Sunday. People should make sure they're still subscribed. We're on the YouTube channel. Tell a friend. Auto download. All of that good stuff as we will wrap up this week's episode and next week's episode. We're also covering Penguin. Mike Bloom and I chatted about the Penguin, which so we'll have a recap of that as well. But Jess, what did you make of the Industry penultimate episode of season 3?
I'm really loving this season.
Yeah.
I really am. I don't know if it's a spicy take, and obviously the season isn't over yet. It might be their best. It
Oh.
might be the best of all three. I'm really enjoying it. I think what I'm liking most is these characters feel so interesting, so morally gray, and in an even more, I guess, big way this season. Like, we're seeing some truly villainous, heinous acts
Mm-hmm.
from multiple characters. It's not just like there's one and you're like, okay, that was a mean thing. That was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also more so that it feels like the stakes have also kind of never been higher, Grace. And we're gonna get into the businessy stuff, and you're gonna explain that to me because
Mm-hmm.
I know what the music tells me to think and feel.
Yeah, exactly.
I listen to the soundtrack and I know, okay, I'm
Yeah.
supposed to hate this person now.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a really great episode. Things are moving at like a breakneck pace here. And can I give like a tiny shout to the character of Yaz this season?
Yes, please do.
I think no, it's not just that they've written this character so beautifully this season. The actor, I don't know if it's
Marissa Abella.
Marissa.
Marissa
Okay.
Abella. I
Marissa
I
Abella.
could be wrong on that, but Marissa Abella, we'll say.
She has been phenomenal
Yeah, she's
in
very good.
terms, she looks exhausted. So, like, also props to the makeup and, the makeup department. But
Mm-hmm.
she is playing the character of Yaz so wonderfully this season. I've never been more intrigued by this character. I've always felt like she was a bit, if I'm looking at like the big three being Harper and Robert and Yaz,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now that
Mm-hmm.
we've, lost some other characters along the way. I've never been more intrigued by Yaz. She's kind of always been third, but I'm really loving what they're giving her this season to play with.
Yeah, I always would have put Robert third, and I think Robert has kind of come into his own this season. But and to me, I think the argument against Robert is that you sometimes are like, yeah, the big three: Harper, Yaz, and Eric. It's like, no, it's right. It's actually right. It's actually Rob. But
Well, I meant as part of like the
no,
okay,
I
like
know
the
it.
Grey's Anatomy reference of like
No,
the
no,
interns.
no, I know what you're saying, and then I'm thinking
Oh, okay.
sometimes I'm like when you're like, oh, the big three, and then I'm like, Oh, I think you could say there's like kind of like multiple. There's like two versions of the big three. I think
Yeah.
you put Robert in there as like they started out together from a story perspective.
They're living
Yes,
together. Yeah.
yeah, they live together. Not anymore. But yes, I thought this episode is very good, and I thought, and there is this thing that's been said a bunch, but I was talking about this with Taryn late last week when we were chatting about the Rings of Power episode that just dropped. And I was out in the wild, Jess, for a little while. I took a little break from most of my podcast and didn't skip industry. We'll say I've been here for all industry episodes. That wasn't shade to anybody other than that was me complimenting industry, which is that when I was talking to people and they'd be like, "Oh, you have a press pass. What do you do?" I was like, "I have a podcast called The Tastemakers. We watch all the TV and tell you what you should and shouldn't watch, and then we do recaps of television shows." And they'd be like, "What are you watching?" I'd be like, "I'm watching industry." And they'd be like, I love industry. I've heard such good things about industry." And then
Mhm.
I'd say, "And I'm also watching Rings of Power." And they go, "We've heard such bad things about the Rings of Power." But there was like in the world, there is a little bit of this like industry might be the show right now. There is that, and I don't think it's undeserved. I think that they have that. I think seasons 1 and season 2 are very good seasons of TV. This to me is like elite television. This to me is stepping up in a way that I think deserves the promotion from Monday night to Sunday night. There is a way that this episode does a lot of different things in terms of the ways in which I think it's good television, which is we basically, other than Henry Muck, who has seemingly disappeared from the show, which we'll get into, I think at some point. Talk about the absence of Henry Muck that I'm sure will come back into play in the finale. His presence is still felt, but him actually being on the television show has disappeared. It sort of ties in the characters together or brings them together. You kind of have this like Eric storyline that's semi-attached to Harper, and then you sort of have Rob and Yaz doing their own thing, but it all still feels extremely connected in a way that I think you can be watching how things in one episode will continue to tie together. It all feels like I'm watching the same story, which I think the show did suffer from sometimes in its earlier version. I've talked about this a lot, that I think the thing that they did the best was they figured out they didn't need to light the whole stage. They like put the spotlight on a few characters that are, for me, the most compelling and most intriguing. And again, while these two storylines I think you kind of have of like the Yaz Rob road trip does feel pretty separate, you can still find all of these links, not just that they're on the same show, to this storyline. The other thing I think this episode does is this one reminds me most of the Rishi episode earlier this season, in the sense that that was a roller coaster where I'm like, we won, no, we're losing. We've won, no, we're losing. This episode does the exact same thing, where I can't really get a read on whether Eric is doing well or doing not until the very end of the episode, where they definitely tell us like he succeeded by doing one of, I think on the show, maybe other than letting her father die, one of the most abhorrent things I think I've seen. I think it honestly could be the most abhorrent, because I feel like the person doing it, there's a question about how awful they were to Eric in a way that Yasmin's dad is tremendously awful to her. So I think it's honestly one of the worst things we've seen someone do on the show to gain power and leverage and control in the company in a way that this episode was wild. It's a wild adventure we're going to talk through, Jess.
I loved it. I
Yeah, me
really
too.
did.
Me too.
I've loved what they've done with Yaz. I've loved the what feels like a really incredible, intense, destructive journey she's had as of late. I feel like if I'm gonna not pick nits, but like I want more for the character of Robert, and we got a lot last episode, so I'm
Uh-huh.
very thankful for that,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like without last episode, we were missing a piece of it, a piece of the depth of his character. And yeah, to your point about Eric, man, it's a pretty nasty thing to do to someone. I feel like it maybe takes the cake. I'd probably have to do a rewatch and reassess
An,
and
an
everything, but
an episode after he tells Harper like all the worst things you think about yourself are true, and like that can be true, and also he's a monster.
he's a
He's
true
so
monster.
bad.
Telling a man who has a brain tumor that they're not remembering something, and then basically getting them essentially fired from their job, or at very least put on like some sort of medical leave, and blaming everything that he is their fall guy. absolutely brutal. It's exactly what Pierpoint was trying to do to Robert. It's exactly
Mm.
what the is it Hanani Industries or whatever the dad that
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yaz's dad's
Mhm.
company is trying to do to
Mhm.
her. Like
Yep.
it's pitted on one person, and it's despicable that not only does this man have a brain tumor, which you and only you know about in this room, you are
Mhm.
exploiting that, making him think something that's not true. And he's kind of your friend. At least he's your colleague who's looking out for you, right? I don't know that we've ever seen Bill do something nasty to Eric. Maybe he has, but at the very least, right now, right in this moment, he's trying to help him, from what I could gather. Again, not in the, I don't know the businessy stuff as well as you, Grace.
Well, I think that in terms of like the way Bill has been is that I do think like to a degree, Bill Bill probably does had not always had Eric's back probably, and I think that there's a world where even his cancer diagnosis and sharing his cancer diagnosis is like this is what Wilhelmina sort of suggests is that like he's not actually looking out for you. He set up a move in which if Mitsubishi comes in and does this, that like that's pretty good for him and probably maybe not even so great for you, Eric. And like that I think I don't even know if what I think is very interesting about this show is that I don't know that you can sort of there's so many layers to this stuff in terms of the decision that Eric makes in the room to throw Bill under the bus. I think is a combination of all the things he's seen and been told, and ultimately I think you can boil this down to is a theme that I've come back to on the show, which is this show, the working at Peerpoint, working for this particular financial institution, or working for financial institutions that do this, require you to be to have a lesser character of people than I would like to for them to be in order to be successful, and that is compounded by the fact that they are people who have been subject to an immense amount of trauma who then make these incredibly selfish decisions to make power, and so it's a cycle that repeats upon itself, that like now what Eric has done has thrown Bill under the bus, and he's made the decision all because of all the things that got Eric to that point, and now like Bill walks away, and it's just like it's sort of like horrific to watch, and at the same time I can't stop looking away. Like we were talking a little bit before we started, like there is a little bit of this like um I think mostly for Harper, and I think to a certain degree Yasmin, I think that these two characters are getting a little bit of energy of like, yes, girl boss, go do it. Like,
Yes.
and Yas. Yeah. So
Yeah, yes.
yes. And I don't fault anybody for having that sort of mentality in terms of like watching the show and wanting Harper to succeed and I guess I'll say thrive in a world that ultimately is not like, has always been conducive to women, like
People
she's
like Bill.
black, like people yeah. So like I think that there's a fair read of this for it to be very fun to watch her just like whip through this business and
Mhm.
Pierpoint and potentially like send Pierpoint on the brink of collapse, and to like delight in that. I think like I'm not saying that these two characters are the same, but there's that same energy of like some people when they watch the movie The Dark Knight are like in love with what the Joker is doing. They're just like, yes, burn the pile of
Yeah.
money, go do it. Like, yes. And I think that that's a fun way to watch this show. I think that that's totally fine, but it also comes with these decisions that they make that just feel sometimes like, oh, that one,
It
maybe someone caught a
hurts.
stray. And not that I think like Bill is not complicit in his own
Oh,
takedown,
certainly.
but
It's just
like
so brutal when this
it's
guy
so
has
brutal.
freaking brain cancer. Like it's
Yeah.
awful. It's so awful. Just
Yeah.
as what Harper does to Yaz is so awful. Like it's hard to watch characters that you know are already going through like a rough time for whatever the reason is,
Hmm.
just get like hit with this sort of thing. And it's yeah, but it's so compelling. I agree with you because despite all of that, no, it doesn't matter how terrible the character is, like on a human level.
Yeah.
You're any of the Roy children, you're talking all those sorts of characters. You still want to root for them, especially someone like Harper,
I rooted
who's
for Kendall Roy, who I thought should have been in prison,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's so compelling watching them because in this show, I truly certain characters you can see the gears kind of turning in their head as they're making these decisions,
Mhm.
like Ken Long who plays Eric, you can see those calculations happening in his head of like, and now I'm going to screw over Bill. And it's what has to happen. Just the furtive glances in that meeting spoke volumes. It was incredible. And this is coming from a person who rarely understands the financial stuff that is happening on this show. You don't need to. What I would say is this is what's, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, not to bring my own sacred Bible show Succession into it.
We already did.
But
I did it already. We did it.
we can't
Mhm.
help it.
Mhm.
But I think with Succession, it was a little different because I felt like they did a good job at explaining the businessy stuff in a way that I understood it versus I think industry. I don't need to know it. And the show kind of doesn't care if you know it.
Yeah, they don't care
So
that you know this stuff
yeah, you
at all.
just follow the music cues, you follow the facial reactions, and you get by. You see a devastated look on Bill's face. You see a malicious kind of like, oopsies, did I do that? Look on Eric's face, like a you would have done the same thing sort of look. And you know that he screwed her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's so good.
I actually think it's a skill. I think that there's a world in which people felt very overwhelmed by this show because they felt like they were watching and they didn't understand it. And I think playing into like we're not stopping down, but we can also make you invested in the things and the scenes that are happening without needing to say, and that's bad because blah blah
Mhm.
blah blah blah. They just throw out all the words. And I think that there's a world in which like there are these like says I really felt like this will be an interesting comparison, which is I felt like that coming out of the first Dune movie, the reboot, like I say the first Dune movie, but I mean the one that like Denis Villeneuve did, where I felt like I sort of fell in love with like how much I felt like there was for me to continue to explore and delve, that the movie didn't really feel like it needed to like, and this character will say this line of exposition that then will explain to me why that thing is happening, in a way that I think is really effective and in my mind immersive, in a way that I feel like they I think they want you more and more as the show has got. This is a Josh Wiglerism of like, let the show teach you what it is. This show and the writing of the show has decided like, do not spend time explaining what's happening. Spend time getting people to feel how we want them to feel while the thing is happening. And you could argue that more explanation would do that. I think it's a very interesting approach to say it doesn't really matter. However, let me explain to you what happened in this episode.
Yes, please explain to me, Grace, what happened this episode.
All
I'm
right.
ready to go to class.
So at the end of last episode, we see that the Pierpoint stock is dropping tremendously fast, but the day closes. And so nobody can buy or sell stock. And so therefore the stock is stuck. So everybody gets together on the 13th floor while everybody else is downstairs having a raging party. It seems like mostly Sweet Pea and ours have a delightful evening.
Can we get
They want Yeah,
just
we'll
to
talk about
interrupt
that.
you for 1 second? I
Yeah.
want an offshoot of
Yeah, me
just
too.
what that day was for those two.
Yeah,
It feels very much
for
like the
real.
Nikki and Paolo of industry, and I
Yeah.
want it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, continue.
Very fun. So upstairs, basically, what the higher ups are trying to do, including Tom Walsley, who's been brought in to basically like the idea before was that he's there to like basically help guide the sinking ship. This is what he's like, no, is that he can like figure out how to maneuver during this very chaotic time. And potentially the idea is, I think eventually Tom, his whole business strategy, the idea when he's brought in, or like the talk of him when Bill and Eric talk about him, is that he's very good at basically like figuring out like what parts of the business they should stop doing and sell and whatever. But that doesn't matter at the moment because basically if they declare for bankruptcy, then the whole thing doesn't matter. They have nothing to sell. They just have declared for bankruptcy. So they need a cash infusion as soon as possible. And this is where there is this one group led by Michael Stone, who is more of the Wilhelmina side of things. And if Wilhelmina thinks that Michael Stone can come in, I believe it's called Barclays is the company who's going to come in and buy invest, do a cash infusion of Pierpoint, or buy Pierpoint, then Wilhelmina is set up for great success because she's the one who had the relationship with Michael Stone of Barclays to do that. That deal falls apart because Otto and his buddy, who I believe is Alexander, I think I've been calling him Peter, and I think his name is actually Alexander, and I might even be getting that wrong. Basically, the news guy basically works with the government person, Akalande, to basically set up, even within that night, like a delay of Pierpoint being bought. Like there's basically like they basically figure out how to like set up a time period in which like, well, you couldn't do this as soon as you needed to do. It's like, we'd love to do it, but it doesn't really help you if we can't give you the money as soon as possible. Government has basically like, she basically used their newspaper and things. And we also get a hint that maybe this lady who has since resigned from her position in government, that'll actually be her who might try to buy the remains of Pierpoint. We get that scene where like they change the article.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's nobody else, they go to Bill and say, let's bring in Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi is going to give us the cash infusion. Everything seems to be going great for Bill and Eric until Wilhelmina sort of talks with Eric and puts a seed in his brain that maybe this whole thing wouldn't really work out for him. And basically what happens is, I believe this is like, Eric notices that Bill did make a mistake
There was a
in the
typo or
pitch deck.
something. Yeah.
Kind of. Basically, it
Ink has
does
the
seem
wrong
to be
printer.
a legitimate like mistake that Bill made, maybe because he is dealing with brain tumor, or maybe not. But essentially what he did, they say this stuff very quickly. Basically, he put in enterprise value versus equity value. Basically, enterprise value is the total of the whole company, including debt. Equity value attributed only to shareholders. And so when he put in the wrong thing, it messed up the numbers, at which Pierpoint seems like a much safer bet for Mitsubishi to invest in, and therefore they will get a higher return on investment when you do the calculations and the numbers that he has in there. But because Bill put in the wrong number, it actually means that like the return rate, the internal rate of return for Mitsubishi is actually substantially lower and does not make sense. And basically in the room, what they're trying to say is like, it's actually not that big of a difference in terms of the number that we put. Like, it's not that huge of an error, but Eric essentially gets Bill to out that he has had this neurological lapse, that he has not seen cognitive decline, and therefore trying to basically convince him it's not a big deal. Bill freaks out thinking it is a big deal, and all of this is enough for Mitsubishi to basically be like, well, we're probably just not going to invest with you anymore. And Tom gets them to leave the room, therefore opening up the thing at the end of the episode where Eric is going to bring in a new investor. So Mitsubishi and Barclays both like kind of don't matter at all at the end of the day, but they're both used as an example of like the way the power shifts in the episode, and then Mitsubishi ends up being in this thing with Bill. Also, all that means is Bill accidentally overinflated, overvalued how much no, he didn't overvalue. He in his document was undervaluing Pierpoint in a way that would have been very good for Mitsubishi. Actually, Pierpoint is probably overvalued as a thing you want to buy at the moment. So yeah, not good for Bill, but this whole thing is brutal. This like the combination here of Eric navigating this, I thought this is what they did so well in this episode, was like, we're navigating one thing, which is like, who can give Pierpoint money? Basically that's the thing.
Right.
And how does it benefit or hurt Eric / Bill, until we learn the way it will most benefit Eric is to cut Bill out of the equation.
Yeah, and we even see, again, not following any of the businessy stuff, paying attention to the music cues, the facial reactions, my context clues. Couldn't help but notice that Eric is the one who takes Bill's seat at the head of the table by the end of the episode.
I thought it was funny that like Bill was at the head of the table anyway. I was like, shouldn't Tom be at the table? But whatever, it's the Mitsubishi meeting.
It's symbolic.
I did like it.
Grace.
Yeah, I do like that they're head of the table. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I really loved this episode. I thought what they did was incredible, setting up the fall of Bill. By the way, why are all the like older white men who are getting stuff put on them, thrown on them in these businessy shows named Bill? Poor Bills, the Bills of the world, really. Taking one for the team here. But it's brutal, especially the look on his face when they're at the elevators and he I didn't realize that Eric was going to kind of give it up that Eric was going to let him know, like, nah, dude, you're fine. Like, it wasn't, well, you did make a mistake, but we didn't have that conversation that I claimed we had. I didn't
Yeah.
realize Eric was going to do that. I thought he was going to just walk into the elevator and be like, see you later, Bill. And that was going to be that. But yeah. Ugh. I don't,
The
what do
the
you make of that as in terms of Eric's decision to not let Bill continue on thinking that he had made a mistake or forgotten something essentially?
I think I like it that because it's messier, it leaves stuff in the air in terms of and I feel bad saying this, but it's like it is a smidge of a nicer thing to do to a man who's he's just eviscerated his
Sure.
life, but it is like basically like at least the idea that like Bill is cognitively declining from what is actually happening to him is kind of off the table. Other than that, he did seemingly make like what they say is not and again, I don't think it's like this huge mistake, but because it is made to look like a huge mistake, it's a huge mistake. Like the perception is reality. So at least there's that. I do think that this show is very very good at like one thing at leaving things in the show and then they might not matter, but then they matter later when they do want to use them. So I think um Kay and Downs, Mickey Downs and Conrad Kay, they're very good at knowing what's in the toolbox that they have available to them. Like I sometimes I think that they like it seems like they're done with something. They don't throw it out. They just put it back in the toolbox. I think a good example of that, I mean, this is one season that's written all together, but the guy who gets in the argument with Rishi earlier in the season, that's who comes into the room at the end of the season. And we learned earlier in the season that he's sort of a Nepo hire because he's the son or at least related to a company called Amirage, who was name dropped earlier in the season. Now that's seemingly who Eric thinks they can get a bunch of funding from. So that guy just being like a guy to be in there to like get in a fight with Rishi mattered then, but it also now matters again later, which I think is like is very very well done. I think the best example of this is like Harper not finishing school was like seemed super important in season 1, didn't seem important in season 2 until it did at the end of the season. And so I
Right.
think that like sending Bill off in this way probably for me is the most um indicative that he might not even come to play next episode, but now he's back in the toolbox in a way that is the most compelling for the writers of the show to utilize whenever they want. And they've decided that is that it's not that Eric fully tricked him or that Eric does like that's how they decided to like send Bill off, which to me is intriguing. And I like it because it's messier. I like it that Eric is not perfect. He managed. I don't think anybody on the show, even Harper, for as like good at her job she is, she often puts herself in these like very messy situations. So it's the
Right.
exact same thing as Eric. Yeah.
It's a more emotional decision
Yeah.
to tell
Yeah.
him in the same way that I think Harper kind of does those sorts of things as well. They're not as surgical as maybe a Succession character might be. They're very emotional and messy too, but it a more kind of mastermind evil genius is more surgical and more precise than I think your Harpers and your Erics are. And speaking of, can we talk about what Harper has going on this episode? Because again, not understanding all of the businessy things, but understanding that certainly what she's doing is insider trading based on the information she gleaned in the bathroom stall and
Mm-hmm.
telling Petra that, and that spooking Petra to be like, nah, like I can't anymore with Harper. It's too much. She's gone too far yet again. At least that's what I am to make of what happened this
He,
episode with her, Grace.
yeah. So Rishi, what I love is how everything is related to one another.
Right.
So Rishi and Eric's like, hey, stuff's happening upstairs. You gotta sell. You gotta like sell all your positions. You gotta make some to look good, basically, for whatever comes next. Basically, like this
Right.
is what they're all trying to do is set themselves up in the best position. And I think Sweet Pea and Anraj are kind of right. I mean, they're right in the sense that like they are moving deck chairs on the Titanic. Like whoever comes in and buys Pierpoint or partners with Pierpoint or whatever, um, yeah, maybe the work you did on the last day before the sale went through is vitally important, and maybe it's not. And so they decide, whatever, we're just gonna party. Meanwhile, Rishi is like, first of all, he's dealing with two things. One is he wants to make sure he still has a job. He's trying to
Right.
leverage a job with Harper, which feels more financially secure, and he's getting phone calls from the man who he owes lots and lots of money to. So he's a little bit stressed. So, but I think Sweet Pea and Anraj are right, because when Harper's like, "Hey, I can only bring over one person," he's like, "Okay, well, forget
Right.
them. Who cares about them? They're done." So again, I think that that's good too, because I think there is a genuineness in him being like, "What if I can bring over these people? What if I can like vouch for them to a degree?" And then when he can't, and he decides to like um, set them loose. So Harper learns that Michael Stone of Barclays is coming in, and she thinks the only reason he would be doing that is to buy or invest money into Pierpoint. So she goes to Petra and be like, the whole plan we had might be effed if Pierpoint gets enough money to continue on. And so she wants to make a move. Petra realizes like this is bad. And how did you realize, like, basically like, we did this whole thing, how come you're not like so sure in what we did? It's like, oh well, I actually did learn information from being in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Petra's like, that's bad. A continuation of the thing I've been talking about this whole season, which is like, just be actually good at your job that requires you to kind of be awful, like
Yeah.
instead of doing like illegal things. And what we end up seeing is Petra tries to go to Otto. But my thing about this is that earlier in the season, it was Otto who stuck in the room with Harper and was like, "You're an outlaw. You're a rebel. You're one of us." Didn't say that to Petra. And so I think that this convo that we're about to see, based on when the car arrives, that I bet we get very early on in the next episode, um, I'm not so worried about it from Harper's perspective, except for I think a similar situation to what, and if we think about Eric and Harper being very similar, Jess,
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
I think that like that's kind of why they butt heads. They're too similar. And by the end of this episode, Eric has found himself in bed with the man who, not actually, but figuratively, with Tom Walsley, who's being like, yeah, F that guy who has brain cancer, right? Like,
Yeah.
F that guy, awful person. I think Harper might be heading to a meeting where she's going to be like, you're not in trouble, but also just remember who you are hanging out with: the outlaws, the rebels, the
Right.
despicable, POSs, which might save her and also might be awful for her own personal life and well-being and character.
Certainly. Yeah. It's fascinating. I love looking at this is why season 2 wasn't necessarily my favorite. I felt like Harper and Eric were a little bit too separated from one another.
Mm-hmm.
I love this path where they're kind of on parallel storylines.
Right.
And they're falling into these, and it's, gosh, you just see the same thing hitting both of them. Harper, she has a little bit of a vengeful streak, and it's fun to watch. We want her to get revenge on Pierpoint because it's entertaining, it's fun, they're a big corporation.
Yeah.
Sure. But also screwing over all her friends and doing things that are super super illegal, and really, again, she plays with fire. She really does. And it's one of those things where I think I said this when I came on earlier in this season, that Petra was going to be like, "Oh, I should have known. I should have known better."
Yeah.
It's like she's getting in bed with someone who is doing things that are, you don't want to be associated with them in business. And it's really interesting, especially now, Grace, that we've kind of separated Harper from, like, it's like Robert and Yaz are their own thing, and then
She moved
Harper's over
out. She
here with
literally moved
Petra.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been fascinating kind of seeing her operate almost solo, completely solo. And also, it's so fascinating now that we're in season 3, and almost none of these people are working for Pierpoint anymore. And we're just following them around, right? Isn't that fascinating that this kind of like workplace drama, these people really aren't at that workplace anymore? It's interesting.
Well, what's very funny is last week we were talking about like the theme of death in the show. In episode 1, someone dies. Someone dies in the first episode. In the first episode of this, we do learn that her dad has died, right? In
Yeah,
the
I
first
don't know
episode.
that it didn't actually happen in the first episode, but we learn about it.
Yeah. Anyway, just the idea that like, is there a death coming? And we talked about, well, I think the most likely candidate is actually Pierpoint. I just don't really see how you lose any
Yeah.
of Harper, Yaz, Robert, or Eric, and like anybody else could die. And I feel like for the most part, I'm like, yeah, okay, we lost that character, but maybe it doesn't have the weight of feeling like, okay, it's a death. But Pierpoint could, in a way that like you still get to keep all those people on the show. This episode is all about basically making sure that Pierpoint, at least for the moment, does not die. I do think the story beat that's most interesting to track here moving forward in terms of like whether or not Pierpoint survives is that But at the end of the episode, Eric does sort of seem to have this lifeline to Ali, who might be a way for them to get a cash infusion. But there's also this idea that like the politician, I'm just gonna pull up her name again just so I get it right. Ada Kunal, I think is her name. That she might buy the company. That's what they're releasing the headline as in the morning. Whether she's connected to this firm that comes in, like I guess that could be true. We didn't really see any of that. I was pretty set that by the last episode, I was like, yeah, I think we're looking at like Pierpoint dying, and then like where does everyone go? I don't know. I maybe joked on the industry pod last week that this is much more of a Mad Menning where, and there's really kind of a joke about that. Like, are we going to be Mitsubishi Pierpoint or are we going to be Pierpoint? And he's
Right.
like, I don't think it matters right now. But yes, interesting to say the least in terms of like, yeah, I mean, Robert's looking for a new job. Harper's at another place. Yaz got fired. Eric seems to be doing well, but yeah.
For now.
Let's talk about Yasmin and Robert because they do go on a little road trip to Wales for a job interview. And also I will say, interestingly, like he goes through this job interview. Ultimately turns out that like, at least in England, this is not going to be this like psilocybin drug. Potentially has no viability, but potentially a move to Silicon Valley for Robert. That to me felt like the potentially like opening of a door for an exit on the show. We haven't talked about this yet. This show did get renewed for season 4, Jess. We didn't talk about this, but it did get renewed this week. So are we all moving to Silicon Valley? There is a lot of Americans in this show, Jess.
It's true. I hope this isn't an exit for the character of Robert. I really like him. I there are times where I wish we got more from him. I find him to be the way he treats Yaz is just it's like she needs that. I'm so happy he's saying to her like, get out of the house. You haven't left in like a long time. I don't think it's good for you to like stay here alone.
Mm-hmm.
He's taking care of her, right? He knows. I love the scene in the car where she like she gets kind of nasty with him.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, this is the way you talk about this is so boring. And
Mm-hmm.
he's just like, gosh, finally, like you're acting like you have some life left in you. Like it guess you're mean, but you're at least, breathing life into the air. And yeah, this whole story is so complicated. So he has the job interview about basically like the mushroom pills essentially. And it seems like he may be moving to California. He seems really excited about it. All the while him and Yaz have always had this connection, and she keeps pushing him away because that's kind of what she does, trauma and all. But Yaz's story this episode, this whole season is so heartbreaking for Yaz. It's like one thing after another, and the hits keep coming with basically. So her dad is now dead, and it seems like the Hanani company that her dad owned, that under which he had all these lawsuits and all those other things, they're willing to pay for everything and basically set up Yaz for life with a ton of money
Mm-hmm.
if she essentially takes responsibility for everything.
Yes.
They're going to pin everything on her. So she will be like, everyone will hate her. She is going to be hated forever and ever.
She already is, but this is a big. I think this is really well done. That the beginning of the season is so much about the paparazzi following her with the disappearance of her father and how much that sort of like was affecting her. And now it might come out that like what they want is for her to have known about all of the stuff the whole time, which is just would be an absolute nightmare
Right.
for Yasmin.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then okay, so that's one aspect of it. And then they say, like, her and her lawyer are saying, well, we're gonna like sue you and blah blah blah. And it's like you don't have the capital, basically. You don't have the funds to fund an ongoing lawsuit. Like, everyone's gonna be getting sued. It's gonna be a nightmare. Just take the money and leave. Now, explain to me this other guy whose name I'm blanking on, who calls her. He's camping and he's not supposed to have a cell phone, and he has Maxim. Is that his name?
Maxim, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He calls her and he says, listen, I've got some info. I've got some documents that show that these women, I guess, were looped in more than they're saying they are. Basically, kind of victim blaming, it seems. And so while if Yaz releases this information, it will be super detrimental to to the company, it also would hurt the victims, is what I've
Mhm.
gathered based on, it's a lot of legal stuff, but it seems like it would hurt all the victims for Yaz to release this information. And she kind of waffles back and forth with whether or not
It
to do it.
My understanding here is not that it would be that bad for the victims. They might have taken settlements, but I think that we're at a time where like I can't blame anybody who takes a shit ton of money from a company who was you were abused by, like, like it's more so that potentially could all blow up in her face because the way she gets information is probably illegal. I think there's
Right.
one very clear, I think, in a show that I feel like often like I don't know what's happening. I think there's a very clear connection as to like the dilemma she's in and how it gets resolved, which is she is dating Henry, who could get the documents leaked, and they could say that they will not reveal their sources, and therefore it's public information, it's out there, and
Right.
then it therefore could probably most likely be used in the case, but it could come back to like haunt them in terms of like how the information got leaked. I That's my sort of understanding of this thing, is that like it's basically like there is information that would prove that she's in the wrong, but whether or not it would actually legally work is the problem. And her being connected to this news business, who we saw flaunt their power this episode, seems like the route we're going with that. I think in
Right.
a show full of pretty awful things that people do to each other, I'm most in the camp of like, please don't, and not just for Yaz, but like now the company is complicit. If the company wants to like out Yaz to basically like and throw her under the bus to basically like protect itself as organization from having hid her father's crimes, that company should be sued out of existence and be destroyed. And so please, Yasmin, release the internal salary documents. But I guess the other piece is that like I guess when you say it's bad for the families, yeah, I guess they might not get a payout. But you would think that I guess there's this thing of like
I
they
think it
get the
was
money
emotional
now.
trauma is more like what she was saying, because it's bringing everything back up for them,
It would bring
and
everything back up.
right.
It's not 100% guaranteed that they would get the money, as opposed to basically the company saying, "Yeah, we'll pay for everything if you say you did it." There's like a
Right.
way in which like some people might say like, I mean, this is, and again, this is, I would not blame anybody in this situation for saying like, "Yes, just give me the money. Like, give me money for what you did to me," rather than going through a justice system that fails a lot of the time. That doesn't always serve people. Like I think that that's a totally fair response for people who are victims of
Right.
abuse to say like, give me a settlement claim. I'll sign an NDA. Who cares as long as you pay for me? I think it's unfair for us to think that like um, people should always put. It would be great if there was always this idea of like, that they could get you know, paid and people would actually face justice and all this stuff at the time. It's just not how the systems are often working. They're there to protect powerful people. So it's like a shitty situation. And so yeah, that's the dilemma that Yasmin faces of like, if you go the legal route, it means that they might not ever get paid. Everything will be brought back up and brought to light. There's a way in which like people's names, you would hope that they wouldn't do this, but like people didn't know were abused would also be like put into this thing and
Right.
have to deal with it. Or it's like I couldn't get paid right now, but Yasmin has to take the fall for all of us. And like, you know, bummer of it. That's a really bummer is like I almost feel bad for saying bummer because it's such a sad situation. But
Yeah.
this whole scene where they end up then going on the trip, and Yasmin basically like once again in a number of episodes is like it's like, won't you just like fall in love with me, won't you, and then is on drugs and basically is like, yeah, he would get hard when I would cry for him too, and like all of this awful stuff. Gotta give a shout out to Robert, who just like the whole is just like, I'm not gonna kiss you while you cut your hand and you're high on drugs, and uh we should just not do anything. And like even the next morning I joked about the the tattoo on the woman, but like it's a little mean for me. Like she's trying to do a thing with Robert of
Oh,
like,
she's being really mean. Yeah.
let's laugh together at this like lady who really has done nothing wrong.
She's
Um
been extra nice, actually.
yeah,
And
and
Robert saying
yeah,
like, "Oh, I left an extra like 20, like
yeah,
sorry about the cuddle."
yeah.
It's all very kind what he's doing, and I feel like he is looking out for Yaz in terms of, maybe some of her drug use and kind of what she's going through in a way that, he kind of rejected when he was having some substance abuse issues along the way.
Mhm.
He was clean up until the whole thing with
The psilocybin, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
But I love their relationship. I think they're fascinating together. Obviously, they have chemistry. But you're like, no, Robert, don't get sucked back in. It's like, it seems like he's like a moth to a flame almost with Yaz, where he can't necessarily, not that he's always going to be sucked back in romantically, but like she's pulling him into her cyclone. And it feels dangerous in a way of
I
like,
Yeah.
like it's just anyone in her orbit kind of scenario. I just, especially because not just in an emotional way
Uh-huh.
where she can say really hateful, mean things to push people away, and she does. And it's like, gosh, some of those, like those little cuts add up, death by a thousand paper cuts. Like it's a lot.
Yeah, what I actually really like of this dynamic is that this is a little bit for me of an inversion of like what the relationship was in season 1, which I think that there's well, it doesn't matter, but I do feel like here Robert is kind of like at least more than he's kind of ever done. I feel like holding his own in terms of not getting sucked into this. He asked her to come along because he knows that she's dealing with this thing. She hasn't left the house. She's eating leftover pizza. He does that as a friend. And it's these moments where Yaz tries to pull him into like something that's more romantic because that's real from her or because it's something she needs in the moment. And I feel like he holds it. And I do feel like there is this world where if she does figure out how to navigate through this and figure out, you know, basically, I guess for all these characters, it's probably just go therapy and then figure it out. And not that you then, I feel like figuring out is such a bad term because it's like that implies that going to therapy means like by the end of therapy you're fixed. And for me, I'm just going to do therapy for the rest of my my life. But you know what I mean? Like they need to be on a level playing field to then like be in a place where they could think about being in a romantic relationship. And like in season 1 it was not a balance, and here it's not balanced either. Like Yasmin is going through some stuff, Robert is also going through stuff. His the woman he was sleeping with, who was like basically also was abusing him, has died in front of him, and like all of this stuff that like they need to probably just be in a better headspace to like. And the thing that sucks about the show, or not sucks, is that proper headspace never comes as long as they like both work in this industry. Like I think
No.
what we're getting to next episode is like they are both tied into a lot of this stuff. Robert was in the back room as the politician came in at a Kunal and like is like being like, well, I'm basically going to be the next prime minister. Like, and like, here's the way in which we're going to like use the market and the media to do that. And she's in there. And now I think Yaz is going to need it to help fight legally and to release the stuff, and like potentially sees Robert as a and Henry like as a way to access that. It's going to get really messy, all while related to the fact that like they also seemingly are going to like buy and invest in Pierpoint in some way. Like it's all coming to a head next episode in a way that I think is like very compelling and interesting. There's so many like I feel like every episode I've got a delicious meal, but then I'm like looking at next week's episode and I'm like, oh my god, look at all the ingredients that you're gonna make a lovely meal out of. And I'm quite excited that it got renewed because I don't know that we always had the renewal before the season. I do think partially, just if you don't mind me, Jess, to complain for a second,
Mm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
on the episode where the very last moment of last episode is like, uh-oh, Pierpoint's gonna die. And then they're like, the show is renewed. And I feel like that
Yeah.
there was a world in which I was like, what if the end of the show is the end of Pierpoint? And now that I know that the show is not is coming back, it certainly doesn't mean
Mm.
Pierpoint doesn't exist, but I feel a little bit less like it changes my outlook on like where we're going next week. Not that I'm not excited, but I think it's just
Yeah, that's
interesting how
fair.
your the outside world and
The
news can
meta.
affect,
Yeah.
yeah, affects how you're watching the show. No,
Yeah.
not
I'm
meta.
excited.
That's a different evil. I don't know if they're evil. I guess I think they're evil.
I'm excited for a season 4 of the show. I think they still have a lot they can do with a lot of these characters. And yeah, like it really does feel like it's all kind of converging at the end, right? As it should, as most good finales do. everything coming to a head at the end of the season on the finale. I'm really excited for it. I think it's
They've
going
been
to be
very
a good
good at
one.
finales. They've been very good, I think, so far.
Mhm.
Vinay is coming back next episode too. We did get a little bit more insight. Rishi kind of shows back up here for a minute, and Vinay is played by Asim Chowdhury, who we both love from Taskmaster. So it
Yes.
seems like he's on the hunt for his money. 24 hours to go for Rishi, so that
Mhm.
seems good. We have not seen Henry Muck since the backroom door, so we presume Henry comes back into play. There's a lot on the table for a finale. Is there anything that you in particular think? I always say like the show. I'm going to ask you the question and then know that like we're sort of answering figuratively of like if they don't answer a question but it's left in an interesting way, then that doesn't really matter. But are there things that you are looking to have answered next episode, and then things that you
Mm.
think, yeah, if they don't answer that, but there's another season, are you okay with?
I trust the show to like do what it needs to do in a sense, right? Like I would like to see the Henry stuff kind of wrapped up. I don't know that that feels like a 2-season arc,
Do
but
you, yeah, you don't think that Kit Harrington, I almost call him just Jon Snow, fully. You don't think Kit Harrington is coming back for do you think he's a Jesse Bloom? I think he's more than a Jesse Bloom, but that's
he kind of feels Jesse Bloomish to me, but I guess we'll see where everything lands with Yaz.
hmm.
Um yeah, I'm really interested to see. Again, it feels like every season finale of the show, we're like kind of hitting the reset button in terms of, okay, what are these characters going to be doing next season? Because Harper's fired or Harper, you know what I mean? Like they all have different things happening in the finale. I don't know. They could do almost anything. I would be thrilled with kind of any of their decisions. I kind of want to see what happens with Petra. She's been interesting to track this season. And like I said when I came on earlier, I was nervous when she hooked up with Harper because Harper seems to just light things on fire and just nope out. And I don't know. I'm interested to see where things land with them. And if we get another Eric and Harper confrontation or something like that. I love whenever they're in scenes together. So
I
I would
think
love
we
to see it.
gotta. I think we gotta get another Harper Eric scene. I think I would not maybe perhaps trust that Petra has a lot of ammunition on
Mm-hmm.
Harper right now. I think one of the bigger things that we talked about earlier in the season was when we learned that Jesse Bloom went to prison. A thing that was like, what will actually make these people change their minds about like what would actually cause some real introspection? I do think the lingering threat of having done something illegal and maybe you're going to go to jail maybe does feel like, and Petra just got ammunition
Yeah.
to do that. um I think I would prefer if Kit Harrington remained on the show. I would not want to be
Okay.
done, I think, with Kit Harrington. I think the biggest thing we'll see next season, which is not a surprise, but I think season 1, I don't know that they knew that they were coming back, and so that season wraps up pretty cleanly. Season 2 ends on a cliffhanger, which is Harper is fired. I expect them to level up in the cliffhanger world. And I feel like that's
Oh.
tricky because I always felt like Succession actually like did pretty well in their finales in a way that it felt like, it did, like I think like, season 2 finale is that's Kendall, the press conference, right? I think, yeah. But there's a way in which like they feel like an ending and they also feel like there's, oh my god, the landscape has changed. Think of the
Yeah.
season 3 finale as well, which is the like Tom Power. I'm fully spoiling Succession. I'm so sorry if you
You
haven't
haven't
watched it.
watched it?
Yeah,
Go
I don't
watch
know
it.
what
What are
I know.
you
You're
doing
gonna,
here?
if you are 53 minutes into our industry recap, you're gonna
With
love
me, with
you're
me
gonna
here, Grace.
you're gonna love Succession.
Oh yeah, I thought you were
I
gonna say if you're this far into an
No,
industry
no, no, no,
podcast and
no.
didn't expect to get spoiled on Succession, I'm like, I'm
No, no,
here.
no.
Hello.
No, more than if they're listening now and they've never watched. It's like,
Yeah,
wow,
go watch it.
you're really gonna love it.
So good.
But I do think there's a way in which like it feels like a clean ending and also feels like the whole world has changed. And I feel like that's what we're headed for next episode in the best way, where we're gonna be like, oh my god, what an amazing episode of television. Maybe it's bad. I'll come and tell you if it's bad. Don't worry. I'm not saying, before I've seen it. That's what, and also like I have no idea where they go next season because things
Yeah.
have changed so much. And let us think and linger on industry. And the ratings have been up this season. They've been doing historic highs. Let people who are going to continue to. I met somebody who was like, "Oh, I just started season 1 of Industry like 4 days ago." I think that a really strong finale gives them such good runway to let people catch up, and a premiere of season 4 when it comes back could be a big deal. So very excited for next week, and I presume Josh and Emily will be back. Thank you so much, Jess, for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really enjoying the show. It is scratching that Sunday night HBO itch for me. So yeah, really happy to be here.
Did you check out the Penguin? Are you going to check out the Penguin? Did a weird thing where they released the episode early this week and then they'll be on Sundays,
Yes,
but
I will check out the Penguin. I have
yeah.
not yet, because I asked my husband if he wanted to watch it, and he said something like, "Well, we have to watch the Robert Pattinson Batman
Oh,
first."
the Robert
So
Pattinson, the Batman is very good. So
we have not seen it,
okay.
so I think that's on our list first, and then we will Penguin. We've been
Yeah.
Americaning a lot,
Oh,
so
fun.
we just finished the Americans, so now
I'm
we're opening
mostly
ourselves up.
I'm mostly Canadian, but I've known to American a time or two.
I would love to Canadian more.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I quite love it. Okay, well, that is our industry recap. As we are covering the Penguin, as I said, Mike Bloom and I chatting with that. Tara and I are doing Rings of Power coverage. There is some Agatha All Along coverage. The weekend program, TV for Real's been very fun. So Hannah Rose was on there this week chatting it
She
up.
was incredible, yeah.
Yeah, so lots happening here on the We Know Scripted TV feed. Again, make sure you're subscribed. WeKnowScriptedTV.com. I should have said this up front. We'll make sure you're subscribed. You can hit the YouTube channel and subscribe there as well. Jess, what else you got going on? You up to anything else these days?
Yeah, you could find me at the Jess Sterling on Twitter. I am on Talkin' Shit, which is a Schitt's Creek recap podcast. Grace has made an appearance there. We are starting season 3, which I'm very excited about because my co-host Stuart hasn't seen it, and season 3 is incredible.
It is very
And
good.
yeah, and if you're a fan of the 90s, you can also hear me on Shit 90 Shows Taught Me talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which we are also in season 3 of, and Felicity, which we're finishing season 2 of. So
Wow.
very exciting stuff. Yep.
So fun. Okay, we'll be back next week with more industry cover. We'll talk about the finale of season 3 of Industry. I'm quite looking forward to it. So until next time, bye-bye.